Hello, and welcome to the weekly voice chat for the Men's Humans Rights Discord server. We're the semi official server of the Men's Rights subreddit. Today's topic: death in the workplace and the disproportionately high ratio of men who die in the workplace. Men overwhelmingly represent those who are killed at work because men overwhelmingly represent those who work dangerous manual jobs. Now, I'm going to post a link in the text chat. Do follow the text chat. Many say it is just as much, if not more so, the main event as the voice chat. Now, you can't click links if you're watching this on YouTube, but we put the link in the description below. You can see this link: men 23 times more likely to die in the workplace than women. This is as of 2019 in the UK. Now we have a special guest, an admin, M Painter, Mr. Mike Painter. I'm going to introduce him in just a little bit. He is a long distance truck driver, and that is a job that is overrepresentingly dangerous in terms of number of deaths. But just think for a second about the jobs that men do for society: construction workers, factory workers, jobs that require putting yourself in physical danger, putting yourself at risk of death, jobs that society absolutely needs to carry on and function. And I always think of this as a kind of form of unpaid labor. Feminists talk about the concept of women's unpaid emotional labor. But couldn't you say that men going to work every single day with the anxiety of knowing that they may be killed at work,
Mm.
isn't that kind of unpaid emotional labor? Men are asked to do these dangerous jobs without really getting any extra compensation. But anyway, Mr. Painter, Mike, if you would like to talk about what you do, the dangers of your job, the importance of your job, the floor is yours. And just quickly to remind everybody, if you would like to speak, that is fine. But this week, we kind of have something a little bit different. This is kind of Mike's episode, but there'll be a chance to ask questions and give comments as the talk progresses. If you are not speaking, please put your mic on mute. And okay, Mr. Painter, take it away.
Cheers, Blue. Yeah, obviously, as you said, I'm a long distance truck driver. Um, our key sort of safety issues, as it were, are accidents and illness. We have high rates of things like heart disease, strokes, and then there's the physical side of the job. The actual driving is a piece of cake, if I'm completely honest, particularly with trucks in Europe because they've got automatic gearboxes and power steering and everything else. What they don't have are the safety features that you get in modern cars. So, for instance, I don't have things like seatbelt tensioners and airbags. If I'm involved in a heavy head-on impact with anything, there's nothing that's really going to protect me. My face is essentially a crumple zone. So, yeah, and if you look in the text chat, you will see I've posted a series of pictures. The first one actually shows where I had a tyre failure at about 55 miles an hour. The tyre started to delaminate and was damaging the underside of the truck. So that was a bit of a moment. I'm lucky it didn't explode, to be honest, because that was actually on the main steering axle. So the thing would have just lurched to one side, and where I was at the time would have probably thrown me into a ditch, which would have put me on my side, which carries all sorts of penalties. There's a picture there of the front of the truck I now drive and the side of somebody's car who decided to go around the front of me when there was no space. And obviously, I hit them, and you can see the damage to the two vehicles there. And the last two pictures I've posted are of steel coils. I actually took these pictures for my bosses because they wanted to know how they had to be strapped together. But each one of those coils is somewhere in the region of 4 to 5 tons in weight. And if they decide they're going to move, then really and truthfully, it's only one place they will go, which is forwards, and they'll go straight through the cab. And there are pictures or videos of that having happened, and in that situation, you basically just wash the person out that was inside the cab. You won't survive that kind of incident. So there's also a picture of a handbook there, which is for the training of drivers to carry dangerous and hazardous goods. So we're talking chemicals, petrol, diesel. If you have enough of a qualification, you can carry nuclear and explosives. So that's all good fun. The kinds of stuff that's out there on the roads, you wouldn't want within 10 miles of you if you knew what it was capable of. So corrosives, acids, that sort of thing. There's actually a story they teach you, or they tell you about when you do the ADR training, dangerous goods training, and that's of an oleum tanker, oleum being a very highly potent corrosive. The tanker rolled over and was compromised by some scaffold tubing, and that resulted in a chemical spill which killed at least one person. So, you know, it's not pleasant stuff. Unfortunately, the person that was killed was actually an off-duty nurse. She walked into the spillage, and yeah, the results were rather unpleasant to say the least. A police officer attending the scene also suffered from chemical burns and damage to his lungs through inhaling fumes.
That must have been quite traumatizing for you then, eh?
Well, I was, not even born when that accident happened, so
okay.
But they showed us the photographs of the scene and what have you. It's rather
must have still been horrific, though. Must have still been absolutely horrible to see the photographs of what happened, though.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's not something. Let's put it this way: it's not something you'd show a child or somebody.
No, definitely not a child. No, definitely not.
And obviously, anyone who is, let's say, easily traumatized, it's not the kind of thing you want them to see. There's also a picture there showing a stack of steel. I actually took that picture because of the way it was strapped. But in the trade, hauling steel is known as dead man's work, because if you have an accident with steel, chances are you are going to die or you'll be seriously injured.
Says in the title.
Yeah. There is, again, accident reports out there where steel has moved and it's gone through the cab of the vehicle. One driver was crushed to death under about 5 or 6 tons. He actually survived the initial steel coming through his cab, but the way it came through, it basically went over the top of him and squashed him down into the seat, and he was still alive, and they could do nothing for him, and the police and emergency services had to basically sit there and watch him slowly suffocate to death through being crushed. Again, it's an accident that you get told about when you're learning to drive these things. And to be brutally honest with you, the biggest problem I have with my job is other road users. They just expect us to be able to stop on a sixpence or move out the way or whatever, and you end up having 2 or 3 very near misses a day, which, at the end of the day, I just want to get home to my 2 children and my partner. I don't want to be dealing with near misses and what have you. So yeah, that's it. I mean, if anyone's got any questions about the job or there's anything you want to know, then fire away.
Something that always strikes me, we read about women's strikes in countries like Spain, where women don't do any work for a day and they walk down the streets banging pots and pans. And I want to make something very clear. I'm absolutely not diminishing the work that women do. If all women went on strike, it would be a disaster. It's the majority of school teachers gone, the majority of nurses would be gone. Women's work is absolutely vital. But to imagine for a second if men went on strike. Imagine if all garbage collectors, or most garbage collectors, I should say, most factory workers, or in this case, most long distance truck drivers, the truck drivers that bring food to grocery stores, the truck drivers that bring raw material such as steel so we can build cars and we can make buildings. So if we didn't have long distance truck drivers, if you and all truck drivers went on strike for even 2 weeks, how catastrophic would it be?
It wouldn't take 2 weeks to be catastrophic. It would take about 2 days, because as soon as a driver's strike was announced, we'll have the same as what we had at the start of the COVID lockdowns. There'll be mass panic buying, so shops would be empty within a day. The petrol stations, exactly the same thing. They'd be empty within a day or two, and we would only have to go on strike for a few days, probably only 2 to 3 if we're brutally honest about it, and it would take months and months and months to get back to pre-strike levels of stock and what have you. And you've got to remember, most stores have maybe 2 or 3 deliveries per day, and that's just from their own what are known as regional distribution centers. It's not including third-party deliveries that they have in as well. So yeah, we're actually, I think in the UK, we're not banned from not going on the roads as a form of strike action, but we're banned from things like go slows or blocking the roads. That would be illegal for us as a form of strike action. So I don't think you'll ever see a proper driver's strike in the UK. I don't know about the rest of the world, if I'm honest. But yeah, one group you don't want to go on strike is truck drivers, because commerce just stops at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's just another example of male labor that goes unappreciated by society. We talk about how privileged men are, and yet it's men who are asked to do these dangerous jobs for not extravagant pay. And when a truck driver is killed at work, it's just, oh, that's a shame. And then we just move on. And the reality is, without people doing this work, without the work that you do, we would be starving.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not just being killed that's a problem. There was a case very recently where, unfortunately, a driver decided to end his own life. And I believe he was in the cab when he was found. I don't know the full circumstances, and I really don't want to think about it. There'll be an accident on the road, and you'll know that the driver hasn't survived the accident, and you've got to drive past the scene. There is a bond of brotherhood amongst drivers. It is something that's very, very real. And when I went through some particularly dark times several years ago, I've got to watch what I say because I've got my son with me, but it was reaching out to other drivers that sort of said, they also said, mate, you can't be out on the road. You've got to get yourself straight, because we don't want you coming the other way, which is a fair point. I don't know if anyone remembers what happened in Berlin several years ago with the Polish truck driver that was killed for his truck. And that was then driven through a group of people.
No, I didn't hear.
It took place several years ago at Christmas in Berlin.
Yeah.
The terrorists killed the driver of the truck, left him in the cab, and then they drove it, as I say, through a group of people. People in the Christmas market.
The marketplace for the Christmas celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So there's always that possibility that your truck could be taken as a weapon, and you could be killed. We have silly little issues in the UK which most people may or may not be aware of. Things like fuel theft is rife, theft from the load. bearing in mind the fuel tank on the one I drive at the moment is on the left-hand side of the vehicle, just behind me, essentially. So I'm asleep in the cab and someone's nicking my diesel. You know, it's akin to somebody breaking into your home. You know, if your load gets taken, you know, they cause all sorts of damage to the vehicle. And I've had fuel theft happen to me. It's not a nice experience because you realise that somebody was 2 foot behind you committing a crime while you were sleeping.
Well, that actually, I'm reminded of the scene of Goodfellas. A truck driver carrying expensive cargo might also be the target for theft and for burglary.
Yep.
Being stuck up.
Yeah.
Does that happen often?
The driver generally they'll normally do it while you're asleep in the cab. With the dangerous goods, there's something that's called high consequences dangerous goods. And if you have that stuff on board, you have to park in a secure area. Purely simply because the nature of the potential risk to life. I mean, I used to transport chlorine and acid. Now, if you know your chemistry fairly well, you'll know what that can be used to produce. It becomes a chemical weapon in the wrong hands. So, the job comes with all sorts of risks. It is what it is. I've made my peace with it, but at the end of the day, I still want to get home to my, at least to my 2 kids and my partner at the end of every week. I don't want anything to happen, but it's life. And anyone who's in a job where there's a risk to life will probably tell you the same thing. It's an issue that they've made peace with. So yeah.
Ashley, would you please mind muting your mic when you're not speaking, because we're getting some background noise, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
I say, if anyone wants to ask some questions, just fire away. Otherwise we can sort of move on a little bit and talk about other jobs if you want to.
What's the most dangerous load you've carried?
Probably the chemicals. Because if you mix 2 different types of chemical together, as I said, you've either got a chemical weapon or a massive explosion. There's footage of methanol tankers and stuff like that going up. And the problem with methanol is you can't see a flame. So you don't know it's burning. It's not until you really look at the tanker or what have you and see that it's changing shape or what have you that oh God, that's on fire. And all you can do is just keep dousing it with water, try and cool it down, and then if it goes bang, make sure you're about 3 or 4 miles away. In part of your training as a dangerous goods driver, you're told if you've got a vehicle fire, do what you can. If you've got a load fire, get the hell away from it. Don't even think about trying to deal with it. Call the fire brigade, tell them what's on board, get far away. The other thing is I've had to be trained in CPR and I've had to be trained in firefighting, which means if there's an accident around me, I have to act as a first responder. So somebody collapses completely unconscious, not breathing, heart stops and everything else, I've got to take control of the scene and administer CPR, which is a rough thing to think about, really. Don't enjoy that thought. I have to say, I don't enjoy that thought.
What percentage of long distance truck drivers would you say are women?
It's about, I think it's about 10-15%. It's not I don't want to sound sexist saying this is not a job for women, particularly. There are women that do it. They are excellent at it. The big problem, particularly in the UK, is the facilities we have. They're absolutely appalling if you're a guy. I've seen toilets you wouldn't let one of your pets go to the loo on, let alone you yourself. The wash facilities are only now really being upgraded to be something half decent. Parking is scarce, so generally, for me, I'll park either at the side of a major road, on an industrial estate, or in a lay-by in the middle of nowhere. And for Americans, lay-bys are basically somewhere you can pull in off the road and stop for whatever reason. So, you can have vehicles going past you at 70, 80 miles an hour, and you need to open your door to get out and go and do whatever. That's always interesting. That's always good fun.
Okay, Katrina is DMing me. She wants to ask you a question, but she is having problems with her mic.
Go on.
So I'm gonna DM her now if she wants me to read the question out. Well, she can probably hear me. Katrina,
Yeah.
do you want me to read your question out to Mike, or try and fix your mic, or?
Just put it in the text chat if you want.
Oh, that's perfectly true. Yep. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Meanwhile,
While she's doing that, we could ask more questions.
oh,
What is the most dangerous situation you've been in, if I can ask?
Nearly rolling over on the M4 in a 26 ton rigid with a 2-ton Moffat on the rear end of it. That or
Could you explain what a Moffat is for people who don't know?
yeah, it's what's also referred to as a vehicle mounted forklift. So when you go to a delivery, you're able to offload the goods yourself. You don't need any kind of assistance from anybody other than obviously closing a road if you're delivering to a road. Basically, what it does, it puts weight over the back axle of the unit. So it acts like a pendulum. And I had an incident on the M4, which runs from London to South Wales.
by any chance, was it on the M25 junction?
No, this was much further down by some services.
That one's a killer.
And basically, on the approach to any junction, you've got a set of markers. It'd be lines inside of a blue background sign. So you'll have 3, 2, 1, and then the start of the junction. On the approach to this particular set of services, we'd gone past the 3 marker, gone past the 2 marker, gone past the 1. We were almost at the start of the slip road, so the junction. The car in the middle lane decided it wanted to come off at the services. I hadn't actually, well, she wasn't actually past me. So what she did, she put a left-hand indicator on and just moved straight across. And I had to brake so sharply that the front of the vehicle dipped down to its fullest extent. The rear of the vehicle obviously comes up, and I was starting to have to put on opposite lock to try and keep it straight. Obviously, if it had gone past the point of no return, it would have probably flipped over because that vehicle was 14.5 feet tall. The other one I had was coming down the M1 with a fully loaded Arctic. So I was at 43.5 tons carrying concrete. And I'd seen this car starting to drift over from my left-hand side. And I pressed my horn and flipped and hit the main beam switch as well, basically say, look, I'm here, as if you could really miss something that's 60 feet long, 14 foot tall and 9 feet wide. And by that point, he was in front of me by about 6 feet, and he hit the brake pedal. I don't know whether I got the brakes on first or the truck's automatic brakes cut in first, but I was wearing my seatbelt and nearly went through the windscreen. That's how violent that was. So those have been the 2 moments really where I thought I'm going to have a colossal accident here. I'm probably not going to make it out unscathed. So yeah, that's that. Right, let's just read what Katrina has to say. Just going to ask the kind of things that have in place for drivers in terms of procedures like hours. I'm told to be more focused on getting things there if it's non-dangerous products, just having them drive through the night, but dangerous goods are trained to not drive through the night. Okay, I won't do a deep dive into driver's hours because it is hugely complicated, very, very boring, and I think about it enough during the week. Basically, Katrina, I can only do 13 hours a day and 9 hours driving per day. There's 13 hours work with 9 hours driving. There are different things I can do to extend my day. The times I drive are just dependent on, so if I start at 5 o'clock in the morning, I can then come off the road at 6 o'clock in the evening. Well, at this time of the year, obviously it's dark at 5 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, so you spend more time driving in the dark. You know, the type of product we move isn't really affected, or doesn't really affect the times we can move it, other than if it's like a oversized load or something like that. They have set times in which they can move, and that's a whole different thing again, which I don't even know anything about or really understand. So hope that answers your question there, Akisha. So anyone got any other questions at all?
I will just say England has a penalty kick, so
Yeah, we can see.
You two are the only ones who care. Well, anyway, question I have is, can you tell us about how the company treats you? And you've spoken before about how you tend to get treated as a bit like the whipping boy, really.
You get worked hard by the company I'm with at the moment. I mean, I'm doing about 65 to 70 hours per week, week in, week out. And this comes under the whole driver's hours laws where I can only do 48 hours over 17 weeks. But you are absolutely flogged. You're just on it the whole time. Unless you have days like I had midweek this week, where I spent 7.5 hours parked in a car park because I couldn't get back until a certain time. The people from the UK will know about the Isle of Wight, which is a little tiny island just off the south coast of England. And to get from the south coast of England to the Isle of Wight, you have to go on a ferry. And the company put me on a 8:15 in the morning ferry going over and a 6 o'clock in the evening ferry coming back. And we were done and finished at the delivery by about 10:15 in the morning. So 7 hours scratching your backside doing absolutely nothing, which is okay. But then, for the rest of the week, you are going to get absolutely pummeled, which ended up being the case. I did 3 15-hour days on the bounce, and Thursday and Friday I did 2 10-hour drives, which was absolutely exhausting. You don't want to carry on like that for too long. And just going back to Darkisha's question about the driver's hours, potentially I could do 5 15-hour days, if you can imagine doing that kind of schedule. But that's not very often. So yeah, go on, Blue.
So first of all, England just scored, so 1-1. But something that I have to think about a lot when I drive is I have tinnitus. I have hearing damage from years of drums and concerts.
Mm-hmm.
And if I drive for multiple hours, I notice my ears buzz a little louder, so I have to wear earplugs. When you drive long distances, do you have to wear ear protection? Is there any risk for hearing damage?
Not really, no. With the trucks that I drive, they're called what in America you call cab overs. So I'm sat above the engine, essentially. I'm actually sat above the front axle. The trucks are so well insulated these days that noise and vibration is kept to an absolute minimum. So the actual physical act of driving the vehicle is as refined as I think it's probably going to be until electric or hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicles are the norm. While we've still got internal combustion engines, you're always going to have vibration and noise of some kind. Going back 25 years, that wasn't the case at all. I should mention there's a few drivers with hearing issues or what have you, or other sensory issues, because the only thing protecting them from the engine was a little tiny piece of metal, essentially. So yeah, it's not, the physical act of driving isn't bad. It's everything else that comes along with it. I mean, Blue, you'll remember because we had that chat on your YouTube channel a while back, where I'd hurt my shoulder, and I've been told that that's a risk of the job. The shoulder injury that I had just happens in that line of work. There's nothing you can do about it. You just got to put up with it. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
As I said, at the end of the day, I've sort of made my peace with the risks involved with doing the job. I have to do my bit. But I have to also rely on people doing their job. Mar, you would have heard of HS2, wouldn't you? High Speed Rail Link.
High speed rail link, yeah.
Yeah, I'm assuming Blue, you probably would have done because you've been in the UK. But they are really, really hot on their health and safety. You have to have like all orange high protective gear. High Speed Rail Link, Darkeisha, basically they're putting a high speed rail network in from London up to the Midlands of England. And I say they're really hot on their health and safety, apparently. I went to an HS2 job and they told me I couldn't be out of the cab because I didn't have the right reflective and protective gear on. So they parked me next to a crane where they were offloading a flatbed trailer with some stuff on it. They then proceeded to crane over the top of my cab whilst I was sat in it because I wasn't allowed to be outside. If you can make that one make sense, good on you, because it doesn't make any sense to me, that one. Again, it's a risk of my job at the end of the day. Oh, they certainly don't have trains over in the States, do they? Really?
No, I mean, we do have long distance
like
freight,
the
but nothing in the way of high speed.
Yeah. Oh, Darkeisha's
Yeah.
got a mic working.
Yeah, we can hear you
Plus-
now.
Yeah, no, it's not my mic working. I gave up and I grabbed my gaming headset, which I know
That's the
is-
spirit.
No, we.
Yeah,
we
I'm
don't
surprised
really
that
have high-speed trains here. The closest thing we have to it is some of the cities, the inner city subway system's pretty speedy, but that's
LA is a joke. I mean, the LA metro is like third world. Well, I mean, I say that.
Well, I'm
used
thinking
to the
about
tube.
like the L lines of Chicago.
we should probably get back on
the
topic.
subway system in NYC.
Well, actually, I mean, when you think about it, the tube is kind of on topic. I mean, when you look at, if you go, the tube is the London Metro. They call it the Underground. I look at those workers going on the electrified tracks, and I'm thinking, if they slip a centimeter to the left and they touch the wrong rail, they're dead. So maintenance of public transport and electrified tracks is another example of a male-dominated job that's necessary. I mean, imagine London if the tube shuts down. I know what it's like. I've been in London when the tube shuts down or goes on strike. It's absolute mayhem. So that's another industry, public transport and maintaining rail networks, electrified rail networks, predominantly done by men that society relies on, that we just don't think about the fact that men are risking their lives every single day doing these jobs. So we have this transportation system that we take for granted.
Yeah. Um, yeah. The other thing is that the drivers in the underground system, they could, if they, I think if they have 3 fatal incidents during their career, that's it. Their career's over. They're no longer allowed to work on the rail. They're basically pensioned off, and unfortunately, that's something that happens an awful lot, particularly on the tubes. It would seem there's been a lot of suicides and stuff.
My
Ano-
my
Another
local
issue too is
station.
the worker. Sorry.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, my local station when I was at uni, Ealing Broadway, was famous for suicides, or infamous, I should say, for suicides.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'm hearing is if you
was
knock
gonna
3
say,
people
like,
off, you get a free pension.
I suppose that's the optimist view of it, isn't it? It's the glass half full view.
Yeah, I mean, railway workers, I think it's hard too if you're a railway worker in like railroad, maintenance.
Mm.
Because I don't know about the UK, but I'm going to be honest about the US. We do not keep the greatest maintenance of our rail systems. And so by the time they start sending out the maintenance teams to fix things, especially in the subway tubes, underground, the
Mm.
underground they really like not having to take care of until they have to. And so by the time they finally send someone to go repair it, that
Yeah.
repair team's in great danger because you've got like so many electrical wires that have been affected by like rain and water damage. And you got like broken rail or super rundown rail that's like sticking out, and it's just horrendous.
Yeah.
And it's honest, it's rough. And the thing is, and then they make them work while trains are passing by them too.
Yeah.
They don't close a part of the line here unless they absolutely like have no other choice whatsoever. Like the damage is that bad.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they make you work while the trains are passing by you.
Yeah. I think
So you could basically just get crashed
yeah.
into
Yeah.
by a train head on.
I think in the UK they actually isolate the line, and they can control it so that only once a train is approaching that area, the line can be re-electrified, and obviously the guys will get off the line at that, before that even gets up close to happening. I think that's how it works. I'm not 100% sure, but I've had friends that have worked on the rails. I think really any job where you're working or operating a machinery is going to be inherently dangerous. Even if it's a little tiny, push along lawnmower or something. And that's why they started bringing like robotics and stuff like that into it. And I know we've had conversations on here about my job and bringing in automated trucks. It's no different to an aircraft. You're still going to need somebody sat in the seat just in case the computer goes wrong. I wouldn't trust any machine that can't be controlled by a human.
To be honest, I'm kind of surprised that America hasn't gotten on to massive train convoys across the states from one end to the other, because while you have the initial expense, it would be an awful lot cheaper to run one train than 20 trucks. But I'm guessing that there's a big petrol lobby getting in the way of that, just like with the public transport.
It's also cheaper in the long run to fly. If you're going from the East Coast to West Coast, it's cheaper to fly than it is to go all the way across country in a truck or a train. So part of the distance is that a lot of our freight is air.
Countries like the UK, even with our rail network, you can't transport goods by rail. It's not feasible. And people say about use smaller vehicles and stuff like that. Okay, a standard 3.5 ton panel van can only carry 1.1 ton in payload. Otherwise, it'll be over its maximum weight. The sorts of weights that I'm carrying, and I'm bearing in mind I'm bringing stuff out of water treatment works, brickworks, and everything else, the steel works, and I'm delivering it to some farmyard in the middle of nowhere, for example. There's no rail links there, so it's got to come by road, and it's cheaper to put that kind of load on a truck and send it on its way. And there are loads that myself and my colleagues look at and we think, are they taking the mickey? 5 pallets of labels going to a brewery in southern Scotland, and you're in South Wales, which is a 380-mile drive. That could go on a van quite happily, but they want to send it up by big trucks, so that's what happens. And they're the ones I'd agree are silly loads to take, but the real heavy loads, like, send them by road.
I mean, I was just thinking, like, you could put the containers on a train at the shipyard, ship them to the city, then drop them off onto trucks. But I mean, I'm assuming there's difficulties with that too. But
It does
anyway.
happen that way. It does happen that way, but you've then got the expense of putting in the infrastructure to move the stuff off with a train and putting it on a truck to get it to wherever it's got to go. And we'll go into somewhere like Felixstowe, for example, and that's a big container port, and all you'll see is just Arctics running up and down from Felixstowe with containers on the back, taking them to wherever they've got to be. So
that's fair enough. So I mean, I've been looking for images of people digging the London Underground, back old pictures.
Yeah.
And I'm having trouble getting them up because of my internet connection. But basically, what you have is a bunch of wooden trellises and guys digging out with pickaxes and shovels, because this was how it was. And while there's machines to do it for you now, like, you still have a lot of this stuff going on, especially in the third world, where you've got like, they'll give a guy a pickaxe and tell him to dig a tunnel, basically. Yeah. And I mean, we really do need to talk about the third world stuff, because when they clean a sewer in India, what they do is they chuck a guy down the sewer naked. Yep. And the guy claws the stuff out of his hands, or maybe a trowel. And that's his job. No protective equipment. Stark naked in this like feces up higher than your head sometimes, because there's pictures of like flooded tunnels and they're clearing them, and what they're doing is they're taking a big breath and they're going down with their trowel and their fingers, and they're digging away, and they're getting cuts on their fingers, and they're like scraping their elbows and all that sort of stuff. And it's getting infected and it's killing people.
Yep.
There was a big article about it a while ago.
The thing is, it wasn't that much different really in only the last 100 years or so. But that hasn't been the case in most first world countries, let's be honest. I've posted it on here many times. The Senghenith mine disaster was only 109 years ago. Wasn't that long. And that took out over 400 men and boys. It's still the largest mining disaster in UK history. So we haven't really moved that far forwards. But as you say, things in places like India or what have you, always another one of people who ever looked like the sort of mining of sulfur and cobalt and stuff like that for batteries or what have you. That's horrific. Absolutely horrific. I'll see if I can find some images actually. Somebody wants to carry on the conversation.
I'm just getting pictures as well.
Yeah, guys, these are open talks, so if anyone has something they'd like to say or ask or any comments, feel free. Maul was talking about pictures of underground workers. I put one there. You can see working on those tracks. I mean, I'm sure they have safety measures in place, but those are live lines. Those are electrocuted lines. So, you know, it's maybe a small risk, but there's a significantly higher chance of dying doing what they're doing than being an accountant.
Thing.
It's worth noting that like there is a gender gap in hard labor and there is a gender gap in harder jobs, even jobs that are just more difficult to do. There is a gender gap. Women have different priorities to men, and they will go for like the jobs that are easier to do, the secretary work, the office work, the shop work, that sort of thing. Now there are exceptions. Nurses are mostly female, and nursing is a horrifyingly difficult job. You're up all hours of the day and night. You got to scrape up like fluids you didn't know the human body could produce, and it's not paid well enough. But these jobs are they tend to be the exception, and it tends to be the most motivated, passionate, and dedicated people who go into those jobs as a general rule. But it's worth noting that for most of human history, nursing would have been an easy job compared to some of the jobs men were doing, even most of the jobs men were doing. Obviously, digging underground is a grand old tradition as far as male jobs goes. We've got digging the underground with shovels and primitive cranes back then, but they're still digging the underground right now. Like they're digging all sorts of different holes for undergrounds all over the world, and it is still an incredibly dangerous job because you just don't know. That might be the one bit of earth that was holding up all the other bits of earth, and down it all comes, and your entire cab is crushed, and so are you. So it's not exactly safe now. And has everyone seen that Twitter comparison job where where it has two videos side by side. On one side, you've got the men working to refit a drill on a oil rig or something like that, and on the other, you have this woman walking around Twitter talking about how they have wine dispensers and spas, and it's more like it's more like an expensive spa trip than it is a job. Like they've got meditation rooms, like games rooms, and all sorts of stuff like that. And obviously, not everywhere is like Twitter, but it's a very, very it's one of those hard comparisons that really highlights the divide between like the much nicer jobs that women tend to work and the much nastier jobs that men tend to work. My dad worked with like molten lead and fumes and no protection and stuff like that, and he's probably suffering with it now, and it's probably cut his lifespan.
I think that sort of thing certainly will.
Or and it can also give like serious injuries. My father would tell me stories about how he worked in the factories when he was younger, in his like 20s and stuff. And it was like the tiniest mistake was almost fatal
Yeah,
because of the kind of machines that they were working with and like the
yeah,
strength of the machines and their absolute lack of protection during that time.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing how quickly a machine can get out of control. or something will happen and you can't stop it. And it can be scary. It can be very scary. You know,
Back then, you had to be meticulous, like absolutely meticulous, because they weren't made with the program precautions they have today.
yeah, but you know, I originally started my working life as a apprentice mechanic, working in a garage, and you weren't allowed to obviously have like necklaces and things like that, and you weren't allowed to have long hair. Or if you had long hair, you had to tie it up really, really well, for the simple reason that if you've got a running engine and you're listening for a particular noise or something, and you put your head really low down, it could get caught in a moving belt. And then, you know, obviously the consequences don't bear thinking about. So it's,
I think we're all thinking about.
yeah, I know. But there's dangers in lots of jobs. I don't know why us men tend to head towards those sorts of jobs.
I don't think we do.
Because we have to.
I mean, they're not. People are.
Because if we don't do it, humanity dies out.
That, and also, I think men are sort of like inherently, when it comes to tend to be more technical. They use their hands more for things usually.
Yeah, it's certainly not the money, that's for sure. I think the average earnings for a lorry driver in this country is about £27,500, which is nothing. At the end of the day, it's not very well paid at all. And when I tell people what I get paid, for example, they go, "Oh, that's really good," and I tell them the responsibility I've got, they went, "That's not well paid at all." So,
And, you know, to that point, feminists talk about the wage gap. I mean, should the danger that you face while working be a factor in the wages that you're paid? I mean, you could argue that the lack of compensation for the danger that men undertake when they work is a wage gap. Men are not being fairly compensated for the fact that they are risking their life and limb when they go to work.
yeah, definitely. I mean, other than that, well, no, I can't even say that one bloke has to climb that radio tower twice a year to change a light bulb. He gets paid, was it £60,000-70,000 a year? But I'm sorry, you would not catch me at the top of that tower. Not for all the tea in China. No, thank you. And I think that's, if you look at somebody's job and you turn around and say, "I wouldn't want to do that," then that tells you something about the nature of that job. To my mind, at least.
And when you think of the nature of things that are considered to be, in the traditional, out of date sense, women's work, such as being a secretary, let's say, would a man not want to do it because he wouldn't want to be perceived as doing quote unquote woman's work, or because it's uncomfortable and unpleasant to do? Well, the reality is, being a secretary is not uncomfortable or unpleasant to do. It's a question for, if you are an old school man, and there's nothing wrong with male secretaries, by the way, just so that's perfectly clear. I mean this from how an old school traditionalist tradcon might think. Men didn't shy from these jobs because they were difficult, dangerous, and demanding. They shied away because of the perception and the male ego, which also says something about the nature of the work that men are driven to do.
Yeah.
Oh, Fred Dibna, he's amazing. It's insane to me that he builds those entire structures by himself. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and demolishes them too. Like he's demolishing that entire chimney, and he'll do it in like 6 months with a chisel.
Never in a million years would you catch me doing that.
No safety rope.
No,
Just
no.
stands on a plank at the top of a chimney, chiseling away hour after hour after hour after hour. And then about midway through, he comes down and he has a sandwich with his cold blackened hands. And he stands around and has a little bit of a chat, and that's his break. And then up he goes again for hour after hour after hour of work. That's the kind of brutal work that men have historically been expected to do. I mean, Dibner is amazing. He's the genuine article, and it's really amazing that he got to have his retirement as like a star for the BBC and like do all this historical stuff. Because most, you know, even though he's had a horribly hard life, most people in his situation never get recognition for it.
No,
Not
but,
even
is it Guy Martin? I don't know if anyone's ever seen him. He's sort of the modern day equivalent, I guess, of Fred Dibner. Yeah, his job is fairly hard graft because he's a truck mechanic, but he's got a second career as a TV personality. He's also absolutely mad enough to go off and do the Isle of Man TT. Has anyone ever seen that at all?
no, but it's sorry.
The Isle of Man TT is a motorcycle road race around the Isle of Man, essentially 37.5 miles of the Isle of Man. And I think in 107 years, it's killed over 280 people. And Guy Martin, as his sort of second or third job, essentially used to go off and race motorbikes on the Isle of Man. And he had a fairly nasty accident, and he doesn't do it anymore, as far as I'm aware. But he's done other stuff which is absolutely bonkers. I think we also have, when we talk about men in dangerous jobs, we do also have to take into account you do get some people that like the danger and they enjoy the adrenaline rush of it. I think that would be a fair comment to make.
For some, but I mean, you look at most of these pictures of men trooping into the mines, Dibner going up the tower. They have this grim expression on their face, like, this is a job, it's got to be done, and I've got to be the one to do it. And they just do it.
Yes.
And
I think the only
most
hard job I can think of. Sorry, Ma.
go on, sorry.
Because I was thinking about, you're talking about Dibner, we started talking about jobs that made me, I don't know, chimneys and stuff. It made me think of chimney sweeps. And this is really random, but I swear it's related. Chimney sweeps is a job that is not so common anymore, obviously, but it was such a dangerous job and no one really thinks about it. I feel like it's one of the few and only jobs that people think come with a smile because they came out with Mary Poppins.
Chimney sweeps for Victorian
And
England.
all we think about is, yeah.
And they were
People
kids.
think they're all like these smiling people. In reality, if you search up the history of chimney sweeps, they were like these little children. We had no idea, actually. I did Mary Poppins before, and we had no idea chimney sweeps were kids until we asked about the history of like Mary Poppins and stuff. And he went, oh, and chimney sweeps are these little boy children they sent to clean. We were like, oh, they were actually kids. We assumed the whole time they were adults.
Nope. The beauty of coming
They
from
said, yeah, and like many of them would fall into like sometimes and die.
Yeah, the beauty of coming from Dickens' country is you learn a lot of this stuff. You can't get away from it. We used to have a thing called the Sweeps Festival, where people would walk through the streets dressed up as chimney sweeps. So,
Oh,
you know,
to
it's
memorialize the chimney sweeps,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, to sort of mark their place in history, as it were. You know, and we have all sorts of strange festivals in the UK. Let's be honest. We have one for a man that tried to blow up Parliament. So, you know,
Hmm.
but yeah, there's always going to be a need for people
anyway,
to do dangerous jobs, and unfortunately, as much as we can try and push against it and everything else, it's always going to fall on men, I think, to do those dangerous jobs. I mean, there was that survey, wasn't there, by the US Department of Defense several years ago when they surveyed the female enlisted and found that less than 1 in 10 would volunteer to go into combat. So, I don't blame them one bit. I don't blame them for not wanting to do it. I wouldn't want to do it either. But when it comes to the crunch, the old joke of there's no such thing as a feminist on a sinking ship. When it comes time to get down and dirty, unfortunately, it's always going to fall on the men to do it, which is a
And
sad state of affairs.
and feminists might say, "Oh, well, that's just the patriarchy." But let's just say that's right. And I could spend a long time on why I think the feminist theory of patriarchy is flawed at best. But so what? The fact remains that it has still been and is still men now that have been doing the most dangerous roles, the function of society. It has been and is men now who do the roles that are most dangerous and most
Hmm.
likely to result in death. That's necessary for the survival of society. So, whatever the reason is, it is still men predominantly who are dying at work to serve society.
Yeah, and I think it's always going to be. Unfortunately, we can talk about gender roles and all this sort of stuff until the end of time, but ultimately, I don't. I think it's one of those ones we're never going to get away from. Some people will say that's being defeatist, but I just think it's realistic.
Well, I think this was a very strong episode. Um, I thank you very much. I know I learned a lot, and I think this is something that we need to be conscious of as a society. I don't think that men get enough credit for the work they do every day. People like you, the work you do is basically invisible. People see lorries on the motorway and they just think, oh, it's just a lorry, but they don't think about how important that role is. What is that lorry carrying? What risk is that driver taking? What does that mean for me in my life? So, it's just the kind of thing that MRAs are aware about, and we try and get society to take notice of the risks that men take every day. And thank you, I gotta say, for the work that you do.
uh, before we go out real quick, I would like to give slight attention. I know we're talking about dangerous jobs, and this is related to dangerous jobs. I posted an article that I'll repost now, and it's about, so it's in the US. It's labeled Death on the Job, The Toll of Neglect 2022. So it's about this year, and it's sort of a journal of sorts that talks about, deaths on the job and fatalities in the workplace, and these kind of jobs that we're talking about, and the injuries and deaths from it. And recently there was a act passed, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSH for short, that was supposed to promise every worker's right to a safe job and to benefits and like injuries and for easier processes for benefits and stuff like that. And it's been failing to fulfill, to put it nicely. And if anything, ever since it's gone into effect, the amount of workplace hazards has actually gone up, and occupational diseases as well. Granted, they do admit that occupational diseases that they sort of didn't count properly because of the whole pandemic, but both have been on a rise actually instead of going down since OSH. So just for anyone who's interested.
I'll have a look at that in a sec. Do you want to do the honours, Katrina?
Yeah, I will be taking us out now. So thank you all for coming to the Men Human Rights Discord server. This is the semi-official Discord server of the Men Human Rights subreddit. We are here every Saturday at 1:30 p.m. Central Time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:30 p.m. UK time. We always love having everyone here. We love hearing what they have to say. Most of all, we love having these interesting topics. If you do ever have a topic idea, please message Men Are Human, Blue, M Painter, or myself. We're always willing to listen and hear what ideas you have and try to bring them to the table. And we hope to see you all next week.